Hi, Richard Little, your land partner. I'm going to be talking today about build to hold, or more commonly known as build to rent. Traditionally, most developers are looking at build to sell, and that's something we've covered in another discussion on another occasion. But more common now is build to hold, build to rent, and that has some massive benefits, and it also comes with its own issues, its own problems. So I just really want to touch on the sort of the headlines, as it were. I think we can use the build to hold model. We've never used it in 6-7 decades now, or over across 7 decades, choosing always to trade, but that's changing because one of the biggest benefits for us is spreading risk. So particularly in uncertain markets, there is a benefit to going into a development project, however big it is, whether it's 1 unit, 2 units, 10 units, or 100 units, with some idea of not necessarily a guaranteed exit, but as close to a guaranteed exit as you can. That's certainly a much more attractive proposition for funders, much more attractive proposition if you've got external investors, etc. It just makes quite a lot of sense at certain times. So what it helps us do is probably also build wealth over the long term. We're quite keen on the long term wealth creation, not the short creation. We can create the vehicle in a relatively short amount of time, but the actual wealth, it's very difficult to actually create that other than over a long term basis. Not regularly anyway. You might get one or two projects that go quite well, and that works okay, but eventually the market will catch you out, and it pretty much catches everybody out at some point. So build to rent. So yeah, what effectively does it mean? It means we're going to develop the project, and either all or part of that project we intend to keep from day one. So does that make a difference? It does make a difference in the scheme. We've got to make sure that the scheme is appropriate in terms of type, size, number of units, and finish. And so the specification, because obviously if we're looking to retain an asset for long term, we are likely to consider things like life cycle costing. So how long something will last, how often it has to be replaced, and what can we do to actually make it last a lot longer. So if we invest a bit more money in the structure and the quality of the finishes, etc., then what we're looking to do is save ourselves a lot of money further down the line in replacement, maintenance, repair, that sort of stuff. So we will put more focus on the quality, the durability of the finishes and of the materials, which we can do. It's difficult to do that if you are building to sell with the fallback position of you'll hold them if you have to. Now, that can still work. However, if you're going into a scheme from day one that we are going to hold a certain number of units, whether it's all of them or some of them, we can actually, the whole thing can be designed and actually built in a way that's going to be much more beneficial as time moves on. So it allows us to develop, build properties, convert properties, bring properties to the market, much needed properties in many areas, through most of the cycle. So we talk about development cycles, economic cycles, and they are largely very similar in terms of timing. So traditionally, from a build to sell, build to market stuff, then we've got to be very mindful of those cycles. We need to be selling before we reach the top of the prices, the top of the curve, as it were, so we don't get caught out. So obviously, looking at build to hold, it does tick those boxes. So what we've seen over the last 5, even 8 years, possibly a little bit longer, is some of the bigger players that have been traditional traders coming into this market with quite large, what we would call PRS schemes, and because they are realising exactly what we're saying now, it mitigates some risk. It helps us develop a further and all the way through that cycle, and ultimately. The point about building, or one of the points about building to hold, is how long are we holding them for, and what is the purpose of actually holding them? Are we actually holding them for long term, and what does long term mean? So it's just a sort of a scenario, if you like. So as I say, traditionally we've been traders. We've now got some schemes that are going to be held, and they're going to be long-term holds. Now, what I mean by long-term hold is the whole structure and everything is because I'm never going to trade it. I'm never going to sell it. So it's going to be put in the appropriate vehicle and wrapped up in the right way. So this is the legacy thing. This is the legacy, so to give income, recurring income in the future for mostly family. So the whole thing, we know what we're doing right from day one. Now for us, that's long term. So long term for me is basically until I'm not here anymore, and even longer. So we're not looking at just the next generation, we're looking at the generation after that. So a lot of this stuff from our point of view, it doesn't work for everybody else, is effectively wrapped up in trusts and stuff like that, so that actually nobody can really touch it too much, or it's very difficult to touch it. So it is long term. Like, there is no plan to sell it. There are conditions which can be put in there to allow sale if it's appropriate, etc., etc. But so that's what I mean by long term. Long term for some other people means we'll hang on to it until such time as the market picks up, and then we'll sell. And there is absolutely nothing wrong with that either. But when we're looking at actually developing to hold, then if we're actually going to hold them and then wait for the market, the cost of holding them and setting everything up, and what you'll generally lose, you'll lose a little bit of the new build premium as soon as you tenant them. So you probably need to be looking at holding them for 3 to 5 years, in my opinion, as an absolute minimum before you consider selling them. Now, some of the issues around selling, around the exit, effectively. So it's before you get into, yes, I'm going to do build to rent on this particular scheme. Right, how many units is it? Is it 10 units? Well, 10 units in a lot of areas is pretty good. You can keep hold of it. If it's 100 units, completely different business structure, completely different sort of thing that you've got to think about. When you've got volume like that, you've got to start looking at, is the demand there? Am I competing with myself? So it's the scale of what you're going to look to hold as well. So you've got to be mindful of that. It may well be, and in our case, to be fair, we've got a couple of schemes where the most we're likely to hold is 50% of them. And that's the most. We're probably looking to hold 25% rather than 50%, but we will hold 50% if we need to, if market conditions are such. Another issue about in exit is when we actually look to sell, if we are looking to sell at some point, how are we going to sell them? Are we going to sell them retail, one at a time? Or are we going to sell them wholesale? And again, there's no right or wrong, but these are the things we need to be thinking about. The biggest thing from my point of view with build to rent, build to hold, sorry, I use those terms interchangeable, is actually being agile, being flexible, being able to change as legislation might change, rules and regulations, etc. Things come in, taxation changes, etc. We need to be able to respond to that. So we either lock them in long term under current legislation to a degree, current rules, or we actually don't. We actually make sure that we know what's going on, what things will actually change the exit, what things will influence the exit. So like I say, if you've got 10 units, and you're actually just wanting to hold them at the moment because perhaps the market isn't too great at the moment, well, that's fine, that's okay. But are you then going to want to sell all 10 in one go? and you'll be competing against yourself on actually selling those units, and you may well be competing with other stuff in the market as well, because lots of other people do the same thing. So as soon as the market starts picking up, we then start getting quite a lot of units on the market, and then what sometimes happens is it actually dumbs the price down a little bit. So we were looking for stronger prices, and then all of a sudden there is probably too much in the way of supply. So the demand might be there, but the supply is too much, so it still dumbs the prices down. So you need to be able to sort of always reviewing this to sort of say, when is the right time? You know, I speak to quite a lot of people in different platforms in different ways, is where they're building and holding, and it's for their pension. That's very, very risky unless you have an exit strategy, planned, and then keep reviewing it. Because if your pension period comes up in the times when the market's not too good, then you're going to take a big hit on the value. So it has to really be, monitored very, 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 very tightly, if you like, very regularly, and make sure that everything is doing the right thing. But overall, if you're doing it with the right schemes, so this is going to really depend on end values and effectively the rent, the yield, what yield is it going to be? Is it going to yield enough so that we can refinance the funding out? And is that going to be okay? Are we going to get the right valuations, and is it actually going to come out? So if the valuation is wrong, whether it's being based on a unit by unit, or whether it's being based as a total commercial enterprise, 10 units, 20 units, PRS scheme, 100 units, 200 units, they're not necessarily valuing them as individuals. There will be a backup value of that, but they're looking at the overall business model, basically. How strong is it? So they'll lend on that. And one of the attractions is that with this particular strategy is that you end up not leaving any money in. That's not necessarily really the case in reality. Very few schemes quite work like that. You've got to have a little bit of good fortune with the markets and the valuations, and you've got to have obviously enough margin in there in the first place. But in theory, a 25% profit, if you've got a scheme that's going to show a 25% profit and you can deliver it within that profit, and again, that's pretty rare, then you will effectively have 75%, borrowings on it and the end mortgages. But of course, there are lots of costs in sort of setting that up and everything. So, and there are tax implications, and sometimes with conversions there's VAT implications of holding the stuff from day one. And these little details are the things that I see quite frequently catch people out. So in theory, it's a fantastic idea, but it's like every different strategy, from investment to development, it's actually until you know what perhaps some of the downsides might be, it's easy to get carried away. So our preference really is on the stuff that we're looking to hold is not too high loan to value. We're not looking to be highly geared. So, we're looking at 50-60% loan to value. So it does mean on most projects that we have is we couldn't hold them all anyway, because we would never get down to those loan to values. But that's okay. We would prefer to sell. So a 10 unit project, we'd prefer to sell, half of them possibly, and then we're probably going to end up with a loan to value on the rest that's something that's quite good. So lower loan to value for us means, yes, we haven't got so many properties, but actually we've got more cash flow. And one of the things that is attractive to us, as say for decades, just traders, and a lot of the other developers that have been around a long time moving into this market, is, well, actually we're going to get some sort of regular income. We're not used to regular income. We're used to lumps of money coming periodically. So that is a real attraction. But the biggest attraction to us mostly is the fact that we are de-risking, spreading that risk. So another sort of thing that I think you need to consider when you're looking at this type of strategy, or this actual strategy, is, yeah, how am I going to spread my risk? So if you work in one area, for instance, and you end up with 20 units, 30 units, 40 units, that might not necessarily be, that might be quite comfortable for you. But if you then want to do another 10, 20, 30, 40 units, it may well be that you should actually do it in a different area, because I frequently see people that are probably got too many units in the one area, and there is a point on which you actually are going to be competing with yourself, and I don't actually think that's a really great way to spread risk. I think it's much better to also, it's not the number of units, it's actually geographically as well. So that's certainly, just because we do it doesn't make it the right way, but it is something that we certainly consider. What I would also suggest is that you do not follow completely the build to hold, build to rent model without that. I think you need some sort of diversification across, build to hold, build to sell, because again, you are actually, with the build to sell, you will allow yourself to bring some chunks of money, providing you're delivering on the potential profits that you're forecasting. You will have chunks of money that you can actually then lower your loan to values on your existing portfolio, or on the stuff that you're doing. So there is a benefit to those chunks of money, and you're not also, chunks of money also mean you're not always, say, cash relying on other people. And one of the things is, until you've got your own money, unless you've got regular partners that will back you, it's very, very difficult for going from one build to hold to another build to hold to another build to hold, because you've got to fund these things. They've actually got to happen. You've got to live as well until this stuff actually starts happening. And it can seem quite good. Oh, we got 50 units, and that's a lot of rent. Well, generally you're sharing that with somebody else. So actually, you need a lot of units to make this strategy really work. In my view, obviously scale, if you do it in the right way, it brings the economy of scale. Obviously, will bring certain costs down: management, admin costs, maintenance costs, repair costs, all of that sort of stuff. There is a beneficial from scale. So overall, just to sort of recap, really, is the build to hold, the build to rent model strategy is great for long-term wealth creation. It's good for income, whether that be monthly or quarterly income, which is always good to see. And it's helping you de-risk, certainly from a developer's point of view. It's helping us de-risk our whole business, and so they're the key things that go for it. The things that you have to watch out for is not having, not competing with yourself, having the right size projects, the right number of units, coming to market, in terms of the demand, looking at where you are actually doing this, the type of unit. So if you're going to build to rent, you're going to have 21 bed flats in an area. Perhaps there isn't necessarily a lot of demand for 21 bed flats. There is a thought that you need to perhaps consider selling some of them. So it's all pretty basic stuff in a way, but overall it's very, very attractive. But it isn't for us the one and only. We think it's actually probably not really a good long term for a sustainable business just to do that. You will need something coming in from somewhere else. Otherwise, you are always going to rely on external investment. So hopefully that's been helpful in regards to build to rent. And we will see you again another day. So it's Richard Little from Your Land Partner signing out.